It's that time of year again. I know how I'm going to spend Halloween. The same way I have for the past 2 years, by slowly sipping a beer at the bar, watching the glass fog up on the smooth wooden counter, staring at it until it warms in my hand. I'm not here to get drunk, I'm there to escape. I never want to be home alone on Halloween night again. I promised the deputy I wouldn't talk about that night. The town didn't need it. Hell, I even deleted the video. But now that Halloween is around the corner, it's all back. Well, small town law enforcement doesn't care much for the internet. I live in a small house at the end of an alley, another unremarkable house in a row of his sisters, mostly prefab. Far enough off the beaten path to be cheap, but not so far off the beaten path as to be rural. The clothes, damn clothes. I didn't expect a lot of kids to come over for Halloween. The drive is long, and most kids manage to fill their baskets long before they get to my house. Besides, I like the peace and quiet. Halloween used to be a good night to snuggle up and watch classic horror movies on TV. I kept a couple of bags of candy nearby, in case one of the kids made it to the end of the driveway, but mostly the evening was spent alone. I can't remember exactly what I watched that night. Perhaps it was because I was drinking beer after dinner, and perhaps I got carried away, dozing off after one too many. I woke up to a surprise. My beer was cold on the side table, and my hand was still clutching the can. I wrinkled my nose, unclenching my fingers. Something had woken me up. The TV was running in the background, the mindless ramblings of late-night programs flickering across the room. Maybe I'd been awakened by high school kids out after the Halloween party, making a ruckus. I checked the time. It was past midnight. I was glad I had invested in a small security system for my home, just the essentials. A good camera to monitor the front lawn, motion-activated lights in the front and back. I was trying to make the tough decision of whether to clean everything up right here and now or just toss the can out on the driveway until the next morning, when the silence was broken by a loud knock on the door. The can bounced off the floor, and warm beer splashed across the hem of my sweatpants. I was numb with shock and couldn't even swear. I just had time to put the can back in its place before the banging sounded again. That arithmocrat became more and more impatient, the tempo picking up as I took a step toward the door. I peered over the edge of the window. The glass showed nothing but my pale face. It was pitch black outside. Why weren't the lights working? The knocking had stopped. Perhaps a tree branch. Or something else was banging on the porch. The peephole stared back at me, the little glass balls suddenly bulging with some half-promised horror. I swallowed, or tried to. My throat was dry, the warm beer on the floor suddenly tantalizing. It's no big deal, I said aloud, hoping the familiar echo of my voice reflecting off the walls would ground me in some way. I walked to the door and looked out, seeing only orange cones cast by halogen streetlights in the distance. Nothing, I thought to myself, feeling childishly stupid. I inhaled deeply, feeling my lungs tense up, then let the air out slowly. Then another knock sounded. I turned to face the door. My heart was pounding in my chest, its frantic dance playing counterpoint to the knocking. I wasn't surprised that my hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. A little town was safe, far from the problems of the big cities. That's what we'd read in the papers. The only thing we feared at night was having our trash scattered around the yard by the nimble fingers of raccoons. I swung the door open. The porch light came on, suddenly blinding me. I blinked, pushing the white spots away from my vision. Standing on the porch were a couple of kids, 9 or 10 years old. I couldn't see them because they were dressed in classic Halloween attire, a simple sheet thrown over each of them, with a couple of holes through which they could see. The smooth lines of the sheet were broken by a pair of small candy baskets. The toes of brand new dress shoes peeked out from under the sheets. A boy and a girl, I thought. Trick or treat. Such a common phrase. I expected to hear the words, but not their fulfillment. There were only 2 figures standing in front of me, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance. Here, I guess, I said. More than anything, I wanted those 2 to get away from my house. The whole situation seemed wrong, the familiar look of the season hiding something deeper, something rotten, like that little panic when you gnaw into a fruit and feel the lack of resistance, as your teeth sink into soft gruel instead of sweet pulp. For a moment, I thought the alcohol haze was to blame, that sleep had clouded my thoughts, but the adrenaline pushed those thoughts away. My fear turned out to be true. I turned to the counter where I kept my keys and grabbed a bag of candy I'd prepared for the occasion. I half hoped that when I got back to the door, the 2 figures would be gone, that they were figments of my imagination, perhaps shadows of some dream inspired by cheap horror movies and cold pizza. I was out of luck. The couple didn't move an inch. They picked up their baskets. They already had candy in them. They were having a good day. You guys are out a little late, aren't you? Where are your parents? The only answer I got was the impatient shaking of the baskets and the rustling of candy wrappers. I held out a handful of candy, ready to drop it and end the evening. I expected to see a small pale hand grasping the handle of the basket. Instead, I saw the anemic matte sheen of plastic. The basket had been pulled off the plastic arm of some store mannequin. This spectacular stunt more than startled me. I shrugged it off. Maybe the voices had been taped, a bit of technology to complement the traditional costume. I felt the fear go away as I explained it to myself in my head. Just little smart kids, perhaps with the help of an adult. Smart, I thought to myself. That certainly cheered me up for a while. Be careful, I told them as I dropped the last of the candy into the baskets. They paid no attention to me, just stood motionless on the worn wooden boards of my porch. I closed the door behind them. The window went dark and the porch light turned off. Strange, maybe the motion sensor stopped working. Some instinct told me to stay put and wait. I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch as the two men walked away. But the light remained dark. I was relieved when the strange strangers left my house. And yet something was wrong. Something was wrong. The flashlight worked. It turned on when it detected me. It saw me. It didn't see the kids. The sensor worked. It was a state-of-the-art device. Passive infrared. Detects movement by temperature change. Like the human body. Like mine, but not children. Whatever was under those spotless white sheets wasn't warm at all. The realization came over me like an ice cube down my spine. It took my breath away. I had to see. I had to recognize. I could barely get my hands to the curtains so hard they shook. As I gripped the edge of the curtain between my thumb and ring finger, the curtain began to ripple wildly. I gathered air into my lungs and peered out through the glass. They were still there, barely 20 yards away from me. Not doing anything. Just standing there, motionless, facing the street. It's that time of year again. As I watched them, they both turned their heads in perfect tandem to pin two pairs of bottomless eye sockets to the window. There was no way this was happening. There was no way they could have seen me approach the window. I had to clump my mouth with the back of my palm and bite down hard to keep from screaming. They knew. They knew I was there. I backed away from the window, dragging my leaden feet across the carpeting. I barely noticed my heel tipping the can backward. The beer spilled out onto the carpet, leaving a whitening stain in front of me. I couldn't believe the animal fear these two men evoked in me. Every instinct told me to run. Run. Call for help. Anything but stay trapped in my own home. What could I do? Call the police and say I was scared by two little kids who came in for a treat. Call any of my friends past midnight and ask them to come over like a little boy crawling into his parents' room after a nightmare. The situation was ridiculous. My mind was telling me that there had to be a rational explanation for everything. But I couldn't explain the slight fluttery feeling in my stomach. I couldn't explain the prickly lump in my throat. They only said 3 words to me, and in an unearthly tone. They knew how cold those lips were. I closed the door to the kitchen, and the sound echoed through the empty house. I turned my chair to face the front door. Then, clenching my hands into fists, I waited for dawn to come. I must have fallen asleep during that long cold wait, not daring to move from my seat, paralyzed with fear that one of those shrouded children would appear at my window, or worse, behind my back. But even that reserve of energy ran out as the night drew too close. I was awakened by a polite knock on the front door. I sat up abruptly, nearly falling off my chair. Stumbling, I walked to the door. A hint of the horror of hours ago still lingered in the air like a musty odor. I looked through the peephole again. This time it was the well-washed face of one of the town's deputies. We'd gone to school together. It was the kind of small town where you knew almost all your peers, if they'd been there in the past. He was a serious man, tough but fair. "Good morning, officer." "Good morning," he replied. The sour look on his face told me it wasn't. His nose twitched as he inhaled the musty, sour smell of beer floating on the floor in the morning sunlight. "Had a good night last night." I thought back to the night before. No, not good. The lawman quickly noticed the fleeting shadow of doubt that flashed across my face. He began to insist on his point. "Why don't you explain why you stole 2 mannequins from a store, dressed them up, and displayed them on your lawn?" He shifted to the side, and I saw 2 familiar figures on the lawn. My lungs didn't fill with air. They were still there. They'd been there the whole time. "You okay, buddy?" The big man leaned over, blocking my view, and propped my shoulder up with one of his strong arms. I brushed his hand away and sprinted out into the courtyard, ignoring the icy dew on my bare feet. The couple stood there, draped sheets joined together. They were holding hands. The 2 of them were holding hands. I gingerly put my palm down on the head of the one closest to me. It was hard. I felt the hard plastic. In one smooth motion, I pulled the sheet off. I let out a strangled cry, looking into the empty green eyes of the baby mannequin. I stepped back. Too quickly. Once on the cold grass, I fell on my ass, clawing and scrambling backward until I stumbled over the sturdy legs of the deputy sheriff standing behind me. He quickly understood my concern and just as quickly realized genuine fear. He lifted me to my feet and helped me back into the house. "You want to tell me what that was about?" He tossed me onto the office chair in front of the computer. I tried, but I couldn't get a word out. The deputy sighed and settled on my couch, wrinkling his nose at the empty beer cans on the side table. He leaned forward. "First call the morning after Halloween, and I'm investigating some shitty break-in at a store downtown. You're hungover and scared to death of a damn pair of dolls in your front yard. All I know is that someone broke into the store, broke the glass, stole sheets and a couple mannequins. Damn kids again. Except the glass. Dot. Dot. The wrinkles on his brow deepened. I watched his Adam's apple bob up and down. The glass was only on the outside of the store. Damn thing. You have a camera in the yard, don't you? I nodded dazedly. How about you give me another 10 minutes of your time, no more. We'll go over the footage. I'll see who put those things on your lawn, and then I'll disappear from your life, hopefully forever. I turned to face the computer and called up the videos saved on the hard drive. They were all streamed over Wi-Fi. Convenient for the time I'd bought the cameras. Just put the double speed back on. We'll soon see who installed them there. I pressed the reverse play button and put the car into reverse. I watched the two of us run from the house to the lawn and back again. Then the first rays of sunlight receding off the grass covered the pair of figures again until they were in darkness. The two of them stood there, unmoving, for the longest time. But the two figures moved jerkily, swaying on their own, back off the lawn toward my front door. The cursor in the corner of the screen danced a little jig, and the shivering returned, stronger than before. The sharp hiss behind me told me I wasn't alone in my discomfort. I shuddered to see myself on the screen, so close to the two abominations, giving them each a handful of candy. I slowed the recording down to normal speed. On the screen, I saw myself turning back into the house to get the candy. Two figures stood there, impassive. As one, they both stared with dark eye sockets at the sheets on the camera. There was something else, too, beyond description. There was a slight ripple, a slight hesitation in the sheets. The mannequins were breathing. I've seen enough. I turned and looked at the deputy. His face was as white as the sheets on the swaddled figures on the screen, and his hand clutched the handle of his gun tightly. That frightened me the most, a symbol of law and order, that had seen the worst of what our little community had to offer, as scared as I was, ready to get a gun in my house. I slammed the window shut and stood up. I walked over to the closet, pulled out a couple of tumblers and a bottle of good liquor. The bottle tinkled satisfyingly a couple of times as I poured the rich golden whiskey into glasses. I placed one of them in front of the other man and took a sip from my glass. An officer of the law could lose his job for drinking on duty. The deputy didn't hesitate as he emptied half his glass. He didn't look at me when he said, "My grandmother was not from around here. She came back from the old country, from across the sea. She hated Halloween. Said it was the night when things that were never meant to see the light of day appeared. One night a year, she told me, for one single night, certain things get loose. It's that time of year again. Candy and costumes were new. In the past, on Halloween Eve, good people crossed themselves, prayed, and stayed home. Whatever is on this tape is not what our town needs, you understand? Them school kids," I said, the lie taking shape in my mouth. Fooling around. The lie took shape, gained a semblance of plausibility. That would be the explanation. No one was supposed to know the dark core of this story. A new camera, it had technical problems that night. Never was a good piece of equipment. Regretted buying it that same week. He held out his hand, and we shook it. To this day, I've kept my word. There's not one good reason why I have broken my promise. I had never known real fear until that night, but I replayed over and over in my head. The recording has long since ended, of course, but every detail of that night is imprinted in my mind. I remember the fear, but I can't recall any of the actions the two of them took to threaten me. Creepy, unnatural, but without a drop of malice. Halloween is coming up. I know where I'll be on this dark night. There are things roaming the streets that shouldn't be there. Masks and costumes aren't always meant for children. Sometimes they are meant for adults. For our own protection. After the deputy left, I watched the video go ahead just once. I remember seeing two figures on my lawn, slowly putting their hands up, covering them under sheets and waiting for the sun to rise. Something that shouldn't be on this good earth. But sometimes, just sometimes, they want simple things. Like the latest prize drawing, for example.